So what do you do with big emotions? Rage, grief, hopelessness, anger. These are all really big emotions that are really tough to deal with. We often push them away or, like ignore them and keep ourselves busy because they hurt. And sometimes we don't want to deal with that. Most humans don't like to be in pain, and we'll do whatever it takes to avoid that situation. But a lot of times when we push these emotions away, we're really missing an opportunity to hear their deeper meaning or to learn about ourselves. So how do you deal with them? So right now where I am, there's quite a few forest fires. Lots of people have been evacuated. A bunch of homes have burnt down. And this is something I've been talking about with quite a few people. They have all these big emotions and they don't know what to do, which is totally fair. So I've come up with 4 little steps and some journal prompts that I will go over in this video. The first thing to remember is self-compassion. Knowing that these feelings are normal and that it is difficult, and it's totally okay if you don't know what to do. As humans, we have the capacity to experience all of the emotions. And in fact, I think we really need to feel all of them. And this helps us just make the best decisions for us as an individual. We all express our emotions differently. And I think a lot of people, when these big emotions arise, sometimes they can start self-shaming because they're judging themselves maybe as being too emotional because they're the only person crying in the room. And if you can have some self-compassion, you might be able to hold space or see that maybe others are equally as sad. They just express their sadness differently. So maybe they don't cry. That's totally okay. If you're a crier, that's also okay. And having that space and being able to be compassionate for yourself and compassionate for others is really important when tragedies are happening and all of these big emotions are coming up. And even just when you're being triggered, if you can have some self-compassion for yourself and compassion for another person who's being triggered, it's really important. Another thing, so the second thing that I think is really important is to be able to name the emotion. I think once you give something a name, you kind of take its power away, but you also, by naming it, you also help yourself figure out how you can get through it. You can help understand it, and then you can work with it instead of against it. And if you haven't done so already, please Google a feelings wheel or an emotions wheel. I think they are fabulous tools to help you put words to what's happening. I think sometimes the big emotions kind of make us go numb. And so if you have a tool that you can look at, it'll help you figure out what's sort of going on in your mind and in your body. So the third thing is, don't push that big emotion away. It's really hard not to. I mean, unless you're in a situation where you have to in order to get away from danger, that's totally fine. But when your body is in a safe space, you do really need to sit with the emotions. And sometimes it's like all of the emotions. That's totally normal as well to feel multiple and sometimes contradicting things at the same time. Those are always difficult situations. But again, naming them and sitting with them and allowing yourself to really feel them. And because these feelings are not going to go away. Doesn't matter how much you ignore it or push it down, it doesn't ever go away, because it's trying to get your attention, because there's a lesson for you to learn. Sometimes it gets louder and more painful until you're finally forced to deal with it. And and this, I've seen a few people, their anxiety just got worse and worse and worse until it led to full-blown panic attacks. And then that's when they were kind of forced to, surrender and acknowledge that something was going on that they really hadn't been addressing for a long time. Because it's scary, right? We don't want to look at the scary, dark parts, but sometimes you have to. And then when you are sitting with it, the next thing you want to do is to just start gently asking questions. And this is going to be hard, so you're going to need to find a way that works for you. I like to do a mix of journaling and moving my body. I find it really helps get that sort of like mental and physical energy, burn that off. So moving my body, I like tidying my house, cleaning, and then or stretching. Those are the two things I usually do. So I might journal for a minute or 5 minutes, depending on how much is going on mentally, and then clean the bathroom or tidy the coffee table, again, depending on what's going on. But you just want to be able to question the emotions in a kind and curious way. And the reason why we're doing this is to help build a relationship with them. And so that way, the next time you start feeling them in your body, you can name them a lot quicker. And then once you can recognize them sooner, you hopefully will be able to control your reactions. So sometimes we don't feel things, and then the lid comes off the can and it's like rage, and you're like, where did this come from? I thought I had everything under control. It's not really necessarily about having the emotion under control, but your reaction to what's happening in the surrounding. That's what you want to be able to control. And I find if you can name it and sit with it and know kind of why it's coming up, and sort of build that relationship, then that can help you with your reactions. And so some journal prompts from those of you who like journaling. I find journaling is such a good way to get things out of the mind and on paper. And so first thing you're going to do is describe the event or situation. Clear, concise, what went down. And then you want to describe how it made you feel and list all of the feelings. A lot of times when you're triggered or there's tragedy or natural disasters, you can have a lot of emotions come up at the same time. And so I find if you can list them all, again, you're putting names to it, and then you can sort of start to tease them apart and maybe just deal with one piece at a time, because really big events are going to bring up really big things within you. The external mirrors the internal. So that's okay. We're going to have self-compassion for maybe having really conflicting feelings that are coming up. And then you can also, the next thing you're going to do is journal about what thoughts or memories are also coming up. One thing I see a lot of times when people are triggered by, the big event or another person, then they can have thoughts. You make snap judgments. Maybe you say something, maybe you react a certain way, and then maybe you feel really awful about how you reacted. And these are two different triggers. And so sometimes what thoughts come up or memories come up, they typically are related, but they could also be two separate things. So try to tease apart what is coming up for you. And then this is a big question. The next question you're going to ask yourself is, what is this big emotion defending me from? Is there something else that I really don't want to feel that this big emotion is protecting me from? So, a lot of times when we're in a situation where we have to feel vulnerable, or we feel scared or hurt or weak or stupid, then sometimes we put on a big emotion to protect ourselves so we don't have to feel lesser, and sometimes this might bring up a feeling or a time, a memory of when you experience these emotions as a kid. Often when we're young, certain things make us feel less than acceptable. And then our ego is going to determine these things detrimental to our survival. So it kind of protects us by wrapping that vulnerable part of us in some armor, and it's usually big emotion armor. Anger is pretty powerful. We can do a lot of things when we're angry, and we can push a lot of stuff down. So that can be a big, thick chunk of armor. But now that you're an adult and you understand a lot more about what's going on externally and also what's going on internally, you really need to revisit these shadow parts and integrate them in your conscious mind. Now, this may take a few days to get to the soft part of you. It may take, an hour. Maybe it's like right on the surface and you kind of knew it, you just didn't want to acknowledge it. This is all just sort of depends on how thick your armor is around it and if it's ready to come into awareness. But when it does eventually come to the surface, just sort of sit with it, and you can ask it what it needs to feel safe. A lot of times these really soft parts of us, they can be our biggest strengths, but only if we can build that relationship with them and learn to work with them. So that is an individual process. It's going to take some time. If you can't do it in a 5-minute sitting, I don't know if anyone can. So again, there's that self-compassion for yourself, and just know that you just have to keep coming back to it because it's not going away. It wants to come out, and it will come out eventually. You just have to build that relationship with it so that your inner world or these inner parts feel safe being expressed and coming to the surface. And so when it does eventually come out, that's when the integration process can start. And sometimes, some things, they are like ready to be integrated into consciousness, and you don't actually have to do much. You just have to like acknowledge that they're there. And then it's like, oh, it's here, it's done. Move on to the next thing. Other times, other things are a little bit more stubborn. So you're going to have to really work on integrating them into your life. So a couple integration examples. Getting creative is a fantastic way. So whatever that looks like for you, drawing, painting, dancing, collage, doodling, poetry, word association. These are all different exercises that you can, creative exercises that will help you integrate something into your life. Another thing I really like to do is to find something that represents that part and carry it with you. Or, if it's a quote, you could write it on a note and stick it on your mirror or on your fridge, or, tuck it in a pocket. It could be a charm or some sort of amulet or talisman. It could be a patch that you sew to your bag just to give you those gentle reminders. And I really love crystals for this as well, because, they're all supposed to mean different things. So if there's, say, self-love is something you need to integrate into your life, well, then you can carry around a chunk of rose quartz. And every time you put your hand in your pocket, there's that little gentle reminder, like, it's okay, remember to love yourself or to be compassionate to others. So those are great, cheap, easy to find little tools that you can use. Journaling, I think I've mentioned that. I really love journaling. A great exercise is to journal about all the times this big emotion protected you, and you can thank it for being there. And then you can start to journal or think about stepping outside of that pattern. A lot of times when we are triggered, we are, like a computer program, we just run the program because we don't know how to run any other way. When we are in emotional distress, it's automatic. You need to survive. This is what you do. And I know it seems very dramatic to say to survive, when it's like, oh, maybe so-and-so is being rude at the office. It's really not survival, but your mind thinks it is. So having self-compassion for your brain acting in a totally normal way, even though I know it's really illogical, that again, that's just how we work. But if you can start brainstorming other ways of reacting, other ways of being, it's more likely that you will be able to choose those other ways the next time you're triggered. Because it will happen again and again and again until you learn your lesson, unfortunately. So if you can figure out a way to help you step outside of that pattern and grow, then that's a really great exercise. And you can either, write. I like journaling by writing, or it's something you can just think about, or typing. Again, whatever works for you. And a lot of people, another exercise is sometimes they like to do some sort of ceremony. So you can write down your old pattern on one piece of paper and write down your new pattern on another piece of paper. And then you can, burn them one at a time, or bury them, and visualize, the ending of the old pattern. So if you're burying it, it would be composting and breaking apart and going back to the earth. And the new pattern that you bury, it's like a seed, and then it's growing, and you can visualize yourself stepping into that new way. So if you really like doing the physical action, that is something that can help you with that. And again, this integration is tricky because it's such an individual process, but also really it depends what you need to integrate as well. So some things, like I said, integrate really quickly. Other things are going to be a bit more stubborn. So sometimes one integration process that worked in the past might not work today for this new thing that's bothering you. That's totally fine. You're just going to have to play around and see what works for you. And so that's why I keep bringing up self-compassion. It's just so important for this whole process. A lot of times, once you start doing shadow work, you can regret or feel a lot of shame about how you acted in the past, because now you know what's underneath that rage armor, and maybe there's missed opportunities or broken relationships that you can never get back. I always just try to remind myself and to remind my clients that this is the human experience. We're all individuals with different traumas and different coping mechanisms, and different pain tolerances. And so, if you can just stay curious and self-compassionate through the whole process, that is going to be really essential. And also recognize resistance when it shows up, because you better bet that it's going to show up. Your ego created this big emotional armor to protect you. And so you bet it's gonna fight you every step of the way, from even just peeking inside, let alone taking it off, because it thinks it's done a good job. It thinks this vulnerable part of you will get you kicked out of the group. So it is trying to protect you. And that, again, is sometimes why building those relationships can take a little while for your inner world to feel safe, kind of fully coming out. And, and while you are doing this, while you're going through this whole process, I always find it really fascinating, and I see this in a lot of my clients as well, is that they can start to see this process playing out in other people. So maybe you're having a conversation with someone and you can witness them being triggered. because maybe they don't want to feel a certain way. Maybe they don't want to feel vulnerable or helpless or like they have no control. So now, instead of you being triggered at their emotional armor, you can take a step back and just sort of see their rage as, the unconscious pain. And you can maybe help them by asking them curious questions that you asked yourself, or giving them the space that you need or that they need to process what's going on. It can be really liberating, not being triggered by someone else's trigger and just sort of seeing clearly what's actually happening. At the end of the day, I think the more compassion you can have for yourself, then the more compassion you can have for others. And I really think that this is how we are going to build connections and create thriving communities. So I hope this has helped. Please hit the like and subscribe button. And if you have any comments or questions, you can just put them below in the comments.